In this lesson, we will learn React components. In React, we can define components in two ways. The traditional way uses class components. But now class components are not very common in new React projects. But we can still find them in older React projects. A class component looks like this. However, for modern React development, the recommended way is to use functional components. We can define functional component with a regular JavaScript function or an arrow function. This syntax is easier to read. For example, a simple app component looks like this. It's functional component. And now we can see it in browser. And let's make a to-do component. And we render it in app. And we can make as many as we want. This reusability is a core concept of React and makes your code more organized and maintainable. So we just create a static component, but usually we need to pass data to them to make them dynamic. This is where prompts come in. Prompts short for properties. And think of prompts as arguments you pass to a function. They allow you to send data from a parent component to a child component. So we pass a title to a to-do. And then we can accept the prompt in child component and use it to render the data. Now we can see it on browser. Prompts are not limited to strings. You can pass numbers, booleans, and even complex data like arrays or objects. Now we have built reusable components and pass the data between them using prompts. This is a fundamental skill in React. Now let's dive into what I believe is the most important concept in React. State. State is like a React component's brain. It holds information about the concept. For example, in this case, if you want to track whether a to-do is done or not, you need to use state. If you use a regular variable like const is done equals true, and then pass it as a prompt, it wouldn't work because React rendering process relies on the state. And then pass is done as a prompt. And then pass is done as a prompt. it wouldn't work. That's because React rendering process relies on the state and the prompts to decide when and how to re-render components. So let's create a state that shows it's done or not. So at the top of the file, we will add import useState from React. Keep in mind, in React, anything that starts with use usually is a hook. React has many different hooks. useState is the most important one. So const here, in useState hook, the first parameter, we name it is done. A Boolean variable. The second parameter is a function that you can use to update the state. Set is done. We name it site is done. And then we pass the default value for the state. I will set the initial value of is done to false. Now, within each of our to-do components, below the title, let's implement a button that says do. We use a p tag to hold this title and a button to say do. And this button will have a on-click listener, arrow function. Inside, we will define that what happens when the button is clicked. We will define a callback function, which means that once the button is clicked, this function will be executed. In this case, I simply want to call the set is done function and set its value to true. If I have this, you will see a title do button. If we click the button do, we don't see anything change. Now we want to change the UI based on the state. Here is done. Let's say done. If it's true, we show done. Otherwise, we show do. Now if we click do, we see the change to done. And here we use curly braces. And just like we did with the title, whether you want to render dynamic data, this is a dynamic data, and you put it within curly braces. Here we check if is done is true. If it's true, we show done. If not, we render do. If I reload the page, it's all do. This is a very important point. The state is not persistent across browser reloads. As soon as we reload the browser, the component will get re-rendered and the state will turn to its initial value. Instead of just saying done or do, so we can make a switch. Set is done. Is done. If we do this, we click do, it turns done. If we click done, it turns do. So we can switch the state. In this example, is done initially starts as false. We want the set is done function, which is used to update the state. When you click the button, it calls useState function. React then re-render only this specific to-do component, which is the beauty of React. When you click and change its state, it only changes this one to-do. It doesn't touch any other to-dos or elements on the screen. If I click this, it only re-render this component. So that's the beauty of React. If we use useState in the app component and passes as a prompt to-do component, we wouldn't be able to do or done each to-do separately. Having the state here allows each to-do component to manage its own state independently and make the component reusable and isolated. I hope this makes sense. We just use the useState as a hook. There are many different types of hooks. useState, useEffect, useMemo, useCallback. There are plenty more, and we will go over them later.